Riley had the kind of eyes that remembered everything they saw. Foxbright, patient as a trap. They skimmed the thin stream threading the hardwoods, then settled on the scuffed oval of a footprint pressed into wet leaves and the white shreds of dogwood petals. He crouched. His knees popped, the sound small as a twig snapping. 13 and wiry, he had learned to move quietly, the way game moves when it wants to grow old. Behind him, Tobin dragged his bare feet through the leaf mold and hummed to himself. A little boy's tune made of 3 notes and nonsense. The tin can he carried rattled with pebbles. He shook it when he was nervous and when he was happy and when he had nothing else to do. No one kept track of his age. Not precisely. 9. Perhaps. He wore overalls and a crust of dirt that looked like another set of clothes. The man they called Ephraim Knox brought up the rear. Leaning on a forked stick, he called his snake beater. He was tall mostly in the way bones are tall when they are not covered by much else. The bristle of hair on his scalp clung like frost to the edges of a black stump. His mouth sloped into a grin that never said anything good. 2 teeth thrust forward like tusks. His eyes were pale. They did not blink unless they had to. Riley pointed without looking back. Somebody's been through, he said. Not a bear. Tobin bent. Tongue stuck out in concentration. Maybe a ghost. Ghosts don't take up space, Ephraim said. Ghosts don't sink no deeper than a lie. This here is a man. Riley flicked him a glance. We going to follow? We are going to do what we always do, Ephraim said, and there was a glitter behind the words. We are going to consult. They moved. The woods were tangle and shadow. A whip-poor-will poured its lonely call into the damp air. Riley lifted a branch and let Tobin pass. Ephraim veered off the faint deer trail, shouldered through laurel, and used the snake beater to part a stand of ferns. The hill dropped. The air cooled and smelled of wet rock. At the foot of the slope lay a half-buried door, no bigger than the lid of a manhole. A board gone gray with years. Ephraim clawed away the moss and tugged. Hinges groaned. A dark mouth opened in the earth. The dugout was shallow and tight, the ceiling low enough to scrape a tall man's shoulder. Candles had burned there until they choked, and their tallow kisses dotted the dirt. The statue sat where a root knuckled out of the wall, 2 feet high, hewn from something rough. Its face rubbed smooth by many hands. The roots curled around it like fingers, as if the hill held it still. Ephraim lit 2 new candles and knelt. He worked his pocket knife open, drew it across his palm, and pressed his bleeding hand to the stone's face. Keeper of the Holler, he breathed. Take what is yours. Guard what is ours. Riley stood at the lip of the door and tried not to breathe too deeply. The air was a sweet rot. The piled remains were older than a season and younger than a story. Skulls grinned without eyes. A child's shoe lay on its side. A ring of keys rusted together into a single iron bloom. Somewhere beneath everything, something hummed. The tone you hear from a refrigerator that never stops. Ephraim's eyelids fluttered. When he spoke again, the words came out thick, as if his mouth was not entirely his. Blood for bone, he whispered. Trespass for meal. He rose and ducked out into the green again, wiping his hand on his pants. He did not look at Riley or Tobin when he said, Strangers don't come in here, and walk back out. Do we go now? Riley asked. He wanted it to sound like a question asked only because it had to be asked. He did not quite manage it. We go when I say, Ephraim said, and I say we go when the light is right. Chapter 2. A Bad Curve and a Worse Hill. Mark Bennett had taken the long way to Nashville out of stubbornness. His father used to drive the ridges for the sake of the views, and he had told Mark the mountains were where a man remembers God is bigger than he is. Mark should have known better. He had a best friend waiting with a tuxedo that did not fit and a minister who would not wait. He should have stayed on the interstate and counted billboards. He never saw the curve until the tires screamed. The old sedan slid across the thin ribbon of blacktop and went over the low shoulder like a shoe off a porch step. Leaves slapped the windshield. Mark tasted copper and felt the lightness of a falling breath before the car pitched and tucked and burrowed its nose into the hillside like a feral pig. Glass exploded. His phone whipped from his hand and spun out the open window into the trees. Silence after violence is always a strange gift. He listened to it. The hush broken by a slow drip tapping on the roof. He touched his cheek. His fingers came away pink. He breathed. Everything hurt, and nothing seemed broken. The door fought him. He kicked, shoved, and rolled out onto. Then off. The hood. His boots sank. The slope back to the road was a rope of roots and a wall of slick mud. He looked up and saw nothing that would help. He cupped his hands to his mouth and called. No one called back. He picked a direction that felt like a decision. He walked. The trees drew close and kept drawing closer. He tried not to think about the way the dark can thicken without an ounce more matter in it. He tried not to think about the stories his father told and his father's father before him. About people who went into these woods and did not come back out. About things older than roads that did not like roads much. After an hour, the light went the way the road had gone. The ground turned to a quilt of wet leaves and black water. Something hooted far off. He stopped walking long enough to learn that standing still was worse. He kept moving until fear turned to anger. What a fool, he told himself, to chase a sentiment into a ditch. When at last exhaustion laid a hand on his shoulder, he dropped into the shelter of a fallen tree's long belly. He tucked himself down into the hollow and tried to convince himself that morning would be different. Chapter 3. Lantern Work. The lantern Ephraim carried had belonged to his grandfather, who swore he could smell a lie with it. It swung from Ephraim's hand and threw a trembling light across roots and bark. Shadows leaped and clung. Tobin yawned and whined and shuffled and scraped his toes in the damp soil. Riley walked close enough to feel a halo of warmth on his hip. Not for love of Ephraim's company, but to keep the world just beyond the amber circle from swallowing him whole. Eyes sharp, Ephraim said. Don't step loud. Riley found what he was supposed to find. A boot scuff. A sleeve thread. A smear of blood he would have missed if he had been older and more certain. Each thing pulled the lantern a little further from home. Why does he talk? Tobin asked no one. Why does he keep talking? Why can't he be quiet? Because he is a person, Riley said. People make noise even when they should not. Ephraim grunted. He asks a good question, and he answers a worse one. They walked until the lantern trembled low and weak and the black began to gather its nerve and return. Somewhere under the ground the mountain sighed. The sound was too deep for wind, too long for a tree breaking. It was a note a body feels before an ear hears it. A slow-throated moan like an old pipe. Tobin froze and then shook his head hard enough to flap his hair. He ran. Tobin, Riley hissed. Let him go, Ephraim said, his voice dry as bark. He will learn that the woods end where I say they end. You sent him to be lost, Riley said. I sent him to be quiet, Ephraim said, and raised the lantern a notch higher. The tracks held. Dawn found them still walking. Light splayed through the high limbs and laid a pale wash on the leaf litter. Ephraim stopped and leaned on the stick. We split, he said. Riley toward the road. I follow the blood. Tobin will come back when the woods are done with him. Riley wanted to say that the woods are never done. He shut his mouth and took the lantern. Chapter 4. The House That Had No Future. When Mark finally stumbled into the open, he saw a yard made not by hands, but by the absence of stubborn plants. A shack slumped into the thin line where scrub gave way to dirt. The roof was tin with more holes than sky. The windows were rectangles of cardboard and old election posters. A door hung from hinges that had lost their conviction. He called. He called again. He knocked lightly. Then with urgency. The knob turned without asking his permission. He stepped into a room that smelled like oil and mold and the end of something. Mud tracked a crooked map across the floor. A tin can with pebbles stood like a child's toy left after a temper. Mason jars lined a sagging shelf. Their pickled contents floated in brine the color of tired tea. A pair of shoes, one small and one smaller, sat beside the door as if waiting for duties they had not been told were over. The sound that pulled his eyes down the hallway was not the sensible sound of anyone's breathing or movement. It was a congregation of flies. He followed. The door to the back room would not close. It had not closed in a while. The bed sagged. The blanket crawled. He did not see the upper half of the woman, and what he saw was enough. He gagged and swallowed again, and staggered backward. The house breathed its stale breath against his face. He turned and ran without grace. He fell off the porch and scrambled to a shelter shaped by wire and rot where chickens had once been. He wedged himself inside and held his breath as if breath itself had a smell. Time forgot itself for a while. When he could think again, he understood that staying still would not be enough. He slid out from the slant of wire and moved into the trees. He did not look back. He did not see the small door in the hill or the statue held by roots. He felt them without knowing what he felt. The ground grumbled like a tired animal. A branch cracked above him and fell. Bright white bloomed behind his eyes. He went down hard and let the world go while it wanted to go. Chapter 5, The Last Lesson. Riley found the road as the sun climbed and made the ditch shine. The car sat tilted down the embankment with its nose in the leaves. The windshield had made a spider web and kept itself together by will. He spat into the dust. Not much blood. Enough to say a man had not walked far before the woods convinced him he should not walk anywhere at all. He took the path back home without needing to think about his feet. The shack rose up out of the green like a rotten tooth. Tobin lay inside, face down in a nest of blankets that had learned to smell like him. He snored the way pigs do when they have nothing left to prove. Ephraim arrived not long after, his clothes broken by brambles, his face flat with the kind of determination that refuses translation. He stomped once on the porch boards as if to punish them into silence. "Find anything," he said, and did not make the question a question. Riley told him about the car and the blood. He said he had seen something move near the line where the woods leaned close. He did not say what he thought it was. Ephraim looped a length of hose over his shoulder. "We are going to escort the trespass out," he said. Riley needed to tell him there would be no escort. He swallowed the truth because telling it to Ephraim never helped. They walked to the edge of the trees where shadow grew like a vine. The air felt as if someone had stuck a wet cloth into it and wrung it out again. The thing that stepped from behind the pine was taller than men are insensible stories. Its arms were the shape of old branches left to thicken. The black of its skin was not a color, but an absence. A piece of night pulled loose and taught to walk. Across its chest a wound ran diagonal and raw, and that wound held a smear of light, as if an ember had crawled into it to keep warm. Ephraim's breath left him and did not return. He dropped the hose. He lifted a hand palm forward the way a supplicant lifts his hand to reassure a god that he has not come to negotiate. "Listen," he said, gentling the word with his mouth. "Listen now." The thing laid its hand on his head and turned it as if it were a stubborn jar lid. The sound was quick and complete. Riley did not see the way Ephraim's body fell, because sometimes mercy is as simple as the fact that a boy cannot watch one more terrible thing and keep being a boy. He did see the creature press Ephraim's shape against the wound as if feeding a fire with a log. And he did see the wound take what it wanted and fold shut again until only that coal smear of light remained. Riley did not call that name he had grown up hearing. He did not address the figure with any title. He took a breath that felt like theft, turned, and ran. He hit the porch hard enough to rattle the empty jars. He grabbed Tobin by the wrist and hauled him upright. "We are going," he said. "Where?" Tobin asked, eyes huge and lucid. "Away," Riley said. "Away is a place. Today it is the only place." They left the shack as if it had been a person they would not forgive. They left the yard and the chicken wire and the hung door and the tin roof. They left without food. They left without permission. They did not look back because looking back is a promise to return. Chapter 6. The river teaches its one song. Mark woke with his cheek in the cool press of mud by a river that moved the way slow days move. He drank until reason returned. He followed the water because everything that wants to live does. By late afternoon, the ribbon of a narrow road showed itself across the far bank. A tow truck thundered toward him like an answer. "You the one put a Honda in a laurel thicket?" the driver asked, and did not sound angry about it. "I am," Mark said, and tried to smile, and found he had left his smile somewhere on the hill. They went first to the county sheriff. The deputy took down what Mark said and did not make the mistake of laughing. The sheriff drove them out. He stood in the yard with his hands at his hips, his eyes measuring absence. He knocked his knuckles against the doorframe and tilted his head the way men do when they want to hear a house tell them what it has done. What they found inside was a smell that knew more about endings than either of them. The back room was a bed, a blanket, a stain, and a swarm. There was no body. There were no bodies anywhere. There were jars. There were tracks, and there were none. It was like a stage set after the actors have slipped away, as if the place itself were embarrassed. "Squatters," the sheriff said at last, passing judgment to staples and tools instead of people. "Bad business. We will pull it down. Nothing good grows from rot." They brought a truck and the men who ride in trucks. They unpinned the roof and tore out the walls, and the shack came down as if relieved. The bare patch of earth drank the light and sat still. Mark's car came out of the trees on a winch. It looked worse for time and better for distance. The sheriff handed Mark a bus ticket to Nashville, as if the county kept such favors in a drawer. On the bus, with the mountains sliding by in greens and blues, Mark found he could breathe like a person again. He told himself that what had happened would fold itself into a story and soften. He told himself waking in a new bed tomorrow would put today behind him the way water puts land behind it. He laid his head against the window, and as the bus rounded the last bend before the valley opened, he saw through a gap in the timber a red thread of light glimmer briefly where he did not expect any light to be. He did not wake the man beside him and point. Some lights you do not name if you want to be invited to sleep again. Chapter 7. The Leaving. Riley and Tobin followed the line of an old logging trail until it became nothing, and then followed the ghost of the trail until it, too, gave up. The land tilted them toward water. They drank and kept moving. A storm threatened, and then thought better of it. They slept beneath the kind of tree that does not care if you live or die, and woke to sap on their fingers. Tobin's humming returned. He hummed when he was afraid and when he was bored. Riley let it fill the spaces that might have made room for panic. He did not say Ephraim's name, because naming is a kind of invitation. He did not say the name they had been taught to whisper to the roots. He did not say any of the words that make girls and boys into inheritors. Near midday, a Tulane cut across their path. Riley lifted a hand, and the pickup that came around the bend slowed without complaint. The woman behind the wheel had hair like steel wool and a jaw that had ground its way through some hard years. "You boys need a hand," she said without the rising lilt people use for true questions. "We need a way," Riley said, and she did not ask him away from what. They rode to the next town and then the next. A minister's wife put 2 bowls on a table and watched Tobin eat his faster than anyone she had ever seen. A clerk found a pair of shoes that nearly fit. The woman with steel wool hair carried them as far as the county line. She did not cross it. There are some invisible fences that work both ways. In the cheap motel, Riley watched a weather report he did not care about and let the air conditioner drown his thoughts. Tobin slept with his mouth open and his hand closed around the string of a window shade he had torn off because he liked the feel. Riley did not think about tomorrow beyond the hard fact that there would be one. Chapter 8. Consequences. When the county men came back to the patch where the shack had been, they found a scatter of broken glass and a circle of dirt blacker than the dirt around it. The sheriff kicked the ground lightly the way a man kicks a tire to pretend he knows things. He did not hear anything beneath his boots. He did not hear that slow bass note pulsing far under the surface. The sound of a hill remembering what belonged to it. He did not hear a second spooling line of vibration pick up like a harmony, as if two notes had found each other by accident. He did not hear, because men like him rarely listen under their own opinions. The county seeded grass, and it grew thin and nervous. Deer cut across the clearing at the edge, then began to skirt it wider. Once, a dog crossed and came out with its tail straight and stiff, its eyes showing too much white. Chapter 9. What people tell and what they keep. The wedding in Nashville went on as weddings do. Mark held the ring with 2 fingers like a token that could too easily slip. The groom pumped his hand hard enough to bruise and said, "You owe me a story." Mark told a version that left out the room in the back, left out the quiet shape in the trees. He mentioned an old shack in a way that made it only a place. He did not talk about light in wounds. On the ride to the airport, he looked up Appalachia on his phone and scrolled through photographs of blue ridges stacked like folded quilts. Old men on porches with banjos and mason jars. Women selling fried pies from coolers. He thought of his father's long-ago voice saying the mountains are not quaint. They are not decoration. They are a fact. And men only get in trouble when they forget the difference. He kept forgetting and remembering again, and each time it made him feel colder. Chapter 10. The Holler speaks for itself. Years later, a game warden followed a blood trail into a thicket where the ground swelled like a bruise. He found nothing he could write down except the fact that his hands shook for an hour afterward, and the knowledge that when the wind came through the pines sideways, it carried a smell he could not describe without using the word old. A hiker found a ring of keys rusted into one. She wore it on a chain for 3 days because she liked how heavy it was, then woke from a dream of breathing dirt and dropped it into a creek. She watched it vanish in water the color of dark tea and felt better without being able to say why. A pair of boys who liked to test their nerves walked up to a hill that was not the biggest hill and decided they had had enough fun when the ground hummed a long, hard note into their feet. They told their friends, and their friends told theirs. And a story began to grow around a fact. There are places that are hungry, and you should not feed them with anything you love. Chapter 11. The end that is not the same as not ending. Tobin learned to keep shoes on and to speak to people in full sentences before he asked for things. Riley learned that pressing a hand to a warm cup on a winter morning pulls heat all the way up your arm. He learned that mercy sometimes means leaving where you belong. They did not go back. They listened to each other when the air grew heavy and the sound of a faraway moan laid itself along the roof. When Tobin woke from dreams of a black wound glowing without fire, Riley laid a palm on his forehead and named off small true things. There are 2 oranges on the table. The sink drips every 3rd second. In the morning, we will walk to the bus. Once, on a late bus with 3 other passengers and a driver who sang to the radio under his breath, Riley looked out into a stand of trees and thought he saw a seam of red open and close as if the world were breathing through a mouth in its chest. He blinked and used the dry sleeve of his shirt to rub at the glass. Sometimes the difference between a thing you saw and a thing you feared you saw is a sleeve. He did not tell Tobin about it. Not because he wanted to keep secrets, but because giving a boy certain pictures to carry is a cruelty. And Riley had discovered he could choose not to be cruel. Epilogue: What the mountain keeps and what it gives away. The hollow where the shack had been grew up a little in sumac and blackberry. Its grass came in like stubble on a man who has decided shaving is a decision for another day. No one built there. People do not always need to know why they obey their instincts. Sometimes obedience is its own science. Mark drove a different route when he visited his friend's family years later. He did not tell anyone about the ticket the sheriff had bought with county funds and a shrug. He sent a Christmas card addressed to that office for a while, then stopped when no one replied. He figured if you live long enough in a place like that, the mail has a way of finding you even if letters do not. Riley grew taller than Ephraim had been. He learned to fix small engines, and to read faces, and to keep cash where no one else would look. He did not forget the man whose hand had fit around a boy's wrist like a shackle and who believed a hill was a god. But he learned to remember without worshiping grief. That is another kind of deliverance. The mountain remained. It was not evil. It was not good. It held what it had been given and made no excuses. It breathed sometimes in a way that made men swear it was sighing. And sometimes the skin of it trembled hard enough to shake loose a branch. And sometimes light showed where no lantern burned. Not everything demands argument. Some things demand respect. And when people told stories about that patch of trees and that particular slope, the stories did what stories always do. They turned warning into entertainment, and entertainment into warning again. They were told by porch light and truck cab and deer stand. They made the night shorter and the distance between people smaller. One more thing the stories did. They kept the name of the thing out of the mouth long enough for most folks to sleep. Closing reflection. Violence does not need a reason to visit a place that is already cracked. Injustice grows well in soil where power answers to no one. Ephraim Knox believed the land owed him its fear. He forgot that fear is a debt that comes due. Mark Bennett believed he could step into the old for a view and step back out again unchanged. He learned otherwise. Riley and Tobin learned that leaving is sometimes the bravest work a person can do, and that what you refuse to repeat is the truest legacy you will ever hand down. If you read this far, I would like to hear from you. Where do you stand on violence wielded in the name of faith, family, or land? What feels like justice to you when the strong make their own rules? Share your view in the comments. Push back. Defend. Argue. Tell a story that taught you something hard. Your voice is another kind of light. And light travels farther in a dark wood than people think.